Ecclesiastes chapter 1. This is a bit of an interesting book because the author doesn't give his name. Now, by tradition, the author is Solomon, and we'll talk about why it is Solomon as we go through this. But the author actually doesn't give his name. He does give a little bit about himself in verse 1, and from verse 1 and verse 12, we can determine that he probably is Solomon. However, because he doesn't give his name and he just calls himself the teacher, in this, while we're doing it, I will call him the teacher. And that is actually where we get the name, Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is one of the Greek ways of saying teacher. And in the book, in Hebrew, the word is teacher, and it is Qoheloth. So the Qoheloth speaks very often of himself. He calls himself the teacher. And that's why, because that's like the words of the teacher is the first sentence. And that's why in Greek we have it Ecclesiastes, which is what we used in English as well. Now, this is a reflective, it's like a really long wisdom piece. Wisdom pieces were popular. They were pieces to teach people something. And the entire book of Ecclesiastes is trying to teach people one thing. And we will discuss that as we come along. The main point, he has one main point, and we'll talk about that starting in verse 2. One of the things I'm going to do is some of the Hebrew here is pretty difficult to understand, so I'm going to take some in-depth study, but we're not going to dive too deeply into the Hebrew. If anybody wants to know more about something about the Hebrew, you can just ask me. But right now we're just trying to go over it and get a good general overview of the book. Verse 1. The words of the teacher, son of David, king of Jerusalem. So these are the words of the Qoheloth, which in Greek was Ecclesiastes, which in English is the teacher. So these are the words of the teacher. Now we know he is a son of David, and he was a king in Jerusalem. And this is why most people think, when you combine this with some of the other stuff that he says, this is why most people think that he was Solomon. However, realize that just when he says son of David, it does not mean literal son, because the Hebrew word for son can just mean descendant. So this person has to be a descendant of King David, who was also a king of Jerusalem, in Jerusalem. So it could be any one of them. Now later on I'll tell you why I think it is probably Solomon, but it could be any of the others. Verse 2. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. This is the main point, or I should say the sub-point of the book. This whole book is talking about how everything in life has no meaning. There is nothing in life that has a meaning unto itself. Nothing we can do, nothing we can say has any meaning. Now, in the end of the book, at the very last section, he is going to reveal what really has meaning. But at the beginning of the book, he wants you to understand that nothing we as humans can do can bring meaning to this life. This life that we live is totally worthless. Everything in it is worthless. So part of this book is very depressing. And some people have questioned why I like this book. Because they're saying everything in this book is just depressing. It's just talking about everything is worthless and meaningless. That is true. However, in chapter 12, which is the end of the book, we see what the author, what the teacher says brings meaning to everything. So chapter 12, we'll talk about the final conclusion, the main point. So his sub-main point, or the theme that runs through the entire book, is that everything on earth, everything we do, is meaningless and worthless. But there is something that gives it meaning. And we're going to see that in chapter 12. Hint, it's God. But we're going to go through and see how the teacher winds up with this opinion. Verse 13. What does man gain from all his labor, at which he toils under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it had risen. The wind blows to the south, it turns to the north, and it goes round, round, and ever, forever returning onto its old course. All the streams eventually flow into the sea, yet the sea never fills up. To the place where the stream comes from, that is where they return again. All things are wearisome, more than one can say. The eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done before will be done again. There is nothing under the sun that is new. Is there anything of what we can say, look, there is something totally new that has never been before? But everything has already been. Long time ago, it was there before our time. There is no memory of the men of old, and even those who have yet to come, they will not be remembered by those who follow. This passage is exceptionally depressing in a way, because the teacher is pointing out to us that nothing we really do in life matters. No matter what we do, it doesn't change the world, because things just continue. And he points this out. He says, what does man gain from all his toil? What does he gain from his labor? Okay, let's look at this. What he's trying to say is no matter what you do in life, no matter what you try to achieve through your own human means, it will have no lasting effect. And this is true. Let's look back. 100 years ago, there were much, much less countries in this world. 100 years ago, most of the countries in the world that are there now didn't exist. They were different countries, different people. The languages that were there 100 years ago don't exist. People have written books, thousands and thousands of books, and most of these books you can't even find anymore. They have gone away. So whatever you do with your own strength and your own abilities are going to disappear and be worthless. Generations come and go, yet the world is still here. And that's true. We have mountains, we have rivers and lakes, and humans come and go. We die. Generations of us will die. But the world continues on. No matter what you do, the world just keeps on going. You will die, and the world will never notice. It will keep on moving. Talks about the sun next. We're never going to change the sun. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. The sun comes up, the sun goes down. What you do in your life is never going to change that. The wind. The wind just keeps blowing and blowing and blowing. It never goes anywhere. It just keeps blowing. It is always blowing. It never stops blowing. The water is the same way. The water goes in the sea, it evaporates, it rains at the source of the rivers, and it flows down. And this is just the same cycle that keeps happening and happening. Now, sometimes it happens less, sometimes it happens more, but it keeps happening and happening. You're not going to change that. And he says, all things are tiresome because humans are never satisfied. And it's true. If you're a human and you we're all humans, I should hope, and you like movies, you will never be satisfied. You can watch a different one and a different one and a different one. You will never say, oh, I have seen them all. Say you like scenery. Say you like flowers. You'll keep wanting to see more and newer ones and different ones. You'll never be satisfied. Say you're someone who likes to talk or to listen. You will listen and talk, and you'll never have enough. Because we're humans. That's how we're designed. Because nothing on this earth is ever going to satisfy us. It's never going to be enough. Verse 9 is the only one that's a little bit hard. You see, he says that everything under the sun has been before and nothing is new. Now, for nowadays, for us, when we look at things, we see all sorts of new things. We see TVs, computers, cell phones, cars, and it's like, whoa, all these things are here. Well, that is true. And during Solomon's time and during the times of the teacher, things didn't change as fast as they do today. And now we have new things. But even when you look at the new things, even when you look at the greatest things, when you think back, to a few years back, those things were there as well. And in the future, even newer, even greater things. So if you buy the greatest cell phone, 5 years from now, that cell phone will be old and worthless, and it will have no meaning. If you buy the nicest car, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, everybody else will have nicer cars. That's just how things are. The cycle doesn't change. You might buy something new and shiny, but it will be old, and it will be useless eventually. That is just how things are in this world. There's no point to it. He says, is there anything that you can say, this is something truly new? Well, yes, airplanes. But if you look far enough back, well, they had birds. Things flying in the sky are not absolutely new. So, and 20 years from now, 100 years from now, there will be other ways of movement, things like that. Traveling never changed. People still travel. So what he's trying to point out is, yes, there are new things technologically. We can see that. We know that. But they will still get old. They still will stop serving the purpose, and then we will still figure out other ways of doing it. And verse 11 is right on track again. People don't remember what happened. Like, you think back. How many of you can name your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather? How many of you know what he did? How many of you can tell the stories about your ancestors? We don't know these things because people pass on. And with each generation, a little is lost, because that is what humanity is. We are something that is fleeting, passing. Your life here doesn't have meaning, is what the teacher is trying to say. And I'm sorry to say, he's going to get more depressing before he changes, So things are going to get pretty depressing for a while. But realize, chapter 12 changes everything. It's like I say when we talk about the book of Revelations, or it's like a movie, in the book of Revelations, you've got bad stuff happening, bad, and people kind of give up halfway through where all the bad things happen. They don't realize in the last 2-3 chapters of the book of Revelations, God wins and everything is awesome. The same way with Ecclesiastes. Don't give up on this book just because it sounds depressing. This is a journey. This is a person's journey through life. He is looking at his past, looking through all the things he has done. He's saying, I tried this. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. He's trying to teach us so that we don't have to do the same stupid things he did. We don't have to change after that. Because in verse 12, he's going to tell us what does work. And the point of this book is to teach us all these things that we try to do in life don't work. But God does, and he's going to get to that in chapter 12. Verse 12. I, the teacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore wisdom, all the things that are done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on men. I have seen all the things that have been done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Okay, one thing I'd like to point out is the teacher has a very high opinion of himself. He knows that he is intelligent. He knows that he is smart. He knows that he has learned almost everything. And this is a guy that has told you that just going to college, continuing to study, reading books, trying to learn and learn and learn, will not bring you satisfaction in the end. He says that just wisdom, trying to know more, trying to understand more about this world, about how things work, will not bring you satisfaction. God has created so many things for us to learn. And even if you could learn it all, it would be meaningless because it's chasing after the wind. What he's saying is that even if you learn and learn and learn, there's still more to learn. You will never learn it all. Okay, he devoted his whole time to this. He was a rich man. He didn't have to study. He didn't have to work, but he devoted his entire time, and he still wasn't able to find meaning. He called it chasing after the wind. It's pointless. You're not going to get anything from it. And this is true. You look at the smartest people in the world, and they'll be able to tell you that they don't know everything. They might know a little bit about one subject, but if you take physics, astrophysics is a great example. Astrophysicists will tell you that they know everything about a planet. And then People will send up a satellite, or people will put up a new type of camera, or a new planetarium, a new observation telescope, and they will learn new things about it, and all the previous things that they knew will get erased. And that happens in science. The more we go, the more we learn. So all that old knowledge is worthless. That's what he's saying. Everything changes. Everything is worthless. But it still stays the same because you never really learned it all. Verse 15, he points out, what is twisted cannot be straightened, what is lacking cannot be countered. Now, in some translations, you'll find what is crooked cannot be made right. Okay, that gives people the idea of something bad, trying to make that good. Now, that's not what he's really saying. He's talking about twisted. So this is the word that you'd use. For example, it's a tree. Say a tree grows, and the tree bends to one side, and it bends another way. It's twisted. It's not straight. You cannot make that tree straight. Once that tree has bent and bent, there is no way to straighten that tree again. It's solid. It's not going to come straight. And that's what he's pointing out, is like there are certain things in life that are hopeless. What is lacking cannot be counted. What is twisted cannot be straightened. Okay, this is a Hebrew proverb. We don't know where it's from or anything about it, but the idea is there are some things you cannot change. What is lacking cannot be counted, meaning if there's nothing there, you can't count it. Like if I took you to a place and I said, well, I had thousands of things here, and I know some are missing. Please count the ones that are missing. Well, if you didn't know how much you started with, there's no way to know how many are missing. And that's the point here. It's like, if it's not there, you can't count it. Verse 16. So I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom, and also to madness and folly. But I learned that this too is chasing the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow, and with more knowledge, the more grief. This is also true. He talks about how he was the king, right? And how as a king, he studied knowledge more than anyone else. And if this is Solomon, it fits. Now, some people say that if it's Solomon, he wouldn't have talked about anyone ruling Jerusalem before him. But there was his father. And there were people that were rulers of Jerusalem before. In fact, Melchizedek was originally a ruler of Jerusalem. And Solomon's trying to say, look, I'm smarter than all those guys. And it's true. God said that he was. God said he was going to give him wisdom. So he tried wisdom, but he couldn't find a point to it. So he tried doing crazy stuff, and he says there's no point to that either. It's all pointless, chasing the wind. And the last thing he makes is very smart. He says, but with wisdom comes sorrow, and with more knowledge, more grief. And this is true. If you look at philosophers are not happy people. They are wise people. They try to see how the world works. They try to get it together. They try to understand it. But they're sad people. So many of the great philosophers committed suicide. They just couldn't handle it, especially the ones who didn't follow God, because they saw the pointlessness of everything in the earth. They were people that were constantly learning, trying to understand, and they saw the world, and they understand the world better than most people. And they understood that there's no point to it all. It's all pointless. It's all meaningless. And that's what he said. Sometimes the more you know, the worse it is, because you know people. You know how people are going to act. You know that how bad things are going to get. And it's pointless. And you look in history and you realize that people are horrible. And the more knowledge you have about humans, the more you realize how bad people are. And there's no point to all of this. Now, once again, I want you to realize that this sounds very meaningless, very pointless. This guy is just like saying everything is worthless. And that is true. Without God, everything is worthless. And he's going to bring that point up in chapter 12.